Okay, let's get this thing out of the way. In its current state, Battlefield 2042 isn't a total disaster, and there is even an ounce of Battlefield experience hidden beneath. I should know, I've spent over 300 hours with the game. Granted, I wouldn't have gotten through it without playing with my friends, and not without having a good whiskey under my whiskers. So, not a total disaster, but certainly a weak game, judging by every sane indicator. But to be fair, it's also heaps and bounds better than it was in its release. That was a bloody disaster. Bafflingly, these pointers I have here have mostly remained the same ever since the betas, and these are, I think, largely the same issues that most sane people have with the game. Although after 300 hours with this one could have an issue with my claim towards sanity. Before we go through the list, hit that subscription button because I can get quite obsessed and anal about games, and if you like that kind of stuff you won't miss my ramblings in the near future. Thanks. So let's get to it. Personality, expectations and fundaments. 3 building blocks that you begin to form an idea about what the game is about. This review consists of 2 parts, rebirth of the series and fundaments of a modern online FPS game. And I will warn you, it won't be a pretty picture. The first rebirth for the Battlefield series was the introduction of the specialists, a change that absolutely no Battlefield fan asked for. Now, after spending this much time with these specialists, I'm somewhat calmed down, perhaps, but I remain absolutely stupefied about the unevenness regarding their specials, meaning their usefulness. Few specialists are absolutely vital, able to keep up your health, replenish your ammo or target enemies hiding in the bushes. Most of them are, however, situational at best, and couple totally broken or plain useless. For instance, I absolutely love the idea of Dozer, who comes with a riot shield and essentially can keep your squad safe if everyone are running behind him. However, I almost never see Dozer in game because the maps are so big that you're likely to get shot from every which direction but the front, and I almost feel bad when I'm shooting a Dozer in the bum. We were promised more specialists in the future. The situation is salvageable, but requires a total revamp of the specialists. They perhaps could bring back the old system and integrate the most functional specials into it somehow, but I'm not holding my breath for this either. As is, the specialists are lopsided and rashly realized. Amping up the map sizes and the player count plain fracked the flow of the game. These 2 things only brought new kinds of problems to deal with. It all boils down to this. Things are intense enough already, even with 10 people fighting over at a single contested point. Adding more people, not to mention more vehicles into the mix, didn't elevate the quality of the fight one bit. Because of the map sizes, people will have to run a great deal in order to get into the action, so you can forget about playing coherently, strategically, because players will jump into any vehicle they can to avoid the running. And these vehicles might be heading entirely different direction where you're needed or wanted to go. Playing with randoms, this effectively splits your squad, splits up every squad in your side, and that makes the entire battle a flip of a coin. The battle results tend to be either overwhelming victories or overwhelming losses. In my 300 plus hours with the game, genuinely tight fights have absolutely been far and between. Practically non-existent. It's not the player's fault, mind you. I mean, who in their right mind likes to run great distances that not only takes time, but most likely also result dying at the halfway point as a tank pummels you from a distance. Then you're sent back to where you started. When they were designing the core gameplay, the stuff that the players have to do and go through and actually spend most of the time doing, I wonder what was going through their heads at DICE, because the gameplay loop just isn't fun. Not only is it not fun, it is tedious and game-breaking to most players, as we've seen in the diminishing player base. In other words, it feels like something you have to go through and suffer in order to actually get into what playing the game should be about. Yeah, they went for a grander scale here. There's nothing inherently wrong about that. They just happen to bollocks everything up, and whatever happens in the battlefield feels absolutely disjointed and aimless. You might have noticed that I've approached the matter through the perspective of one of the game's main modes, Conquests. There is of course another game mode, but in my opinion it is by far the worst experience. When you have 128 players focusing on choke points, it's like shooting fish in a barrel. And it reminds me of the crapfest maps from previous Battlefield games, maps like Operation Metro, where you literally were shooting fish in a barrel. In the 300 hours, few maps stood out. These were Manifest, Discarded and Orbital. All for the same reason. There is a degree of cover in the maps that enable you not to get pulverized by vehicles from a distance. Sure, the vehicles are a presence, but these maps aren't plain glaring balls of butthurt, and you can safely down a chopper or two without having to stand on the top of a sand dune without any kind of cover. Oh, and remember that Levolution thing that DICE was hyping some 10 years ago? It's gone. Environmental destruction is all glass and mirrors. Sure, trees fall down and shrubberies get blown to smithereens. Building destruction, however, is essentially a throwback into the 90s. This I didn't really expect from a new Battlefield game, even though they've toned down the Levolution thing ever since its invention. Remember when it actually mattered that someone carried a repair torch? Neither can I. In the game you can choose tools and gear in addition to your main weapon, as is gearing up for the fights, support going and playing solo. Playing with randoms, teamwork is in the minority. But in all honesty, and again, who can blame the players really? Why should you carry a spawn beacon if there is a high chance of meeting a tank head on and not being able to do anything about it? A player will almost always choose a bazooka over a, let's say, ammo or health crate. Additionally, the reward of getting to deliver the last rocket into a tank and racking up those kills is one of the highlight moments in playing the game. So you can't really blame the players for choosing to focus on fun rather than doing something else. Though I have to thank each and every player who chooses to carry a health crate and do God's work. You bloody rule. Certainly, even a single squad that works well together, with someone replenishing health and another throwing ammo around, while others in the squad deal with vehicles, can have great fun and success playing together. Unfortunately, however, the battle consists of 32 squads, 16 on each side. One squad that works well together can work wonders, but rarely can, nor shouldn't be able to, change the course of the entire battle by itself. Thinking about tools and gear, there is a similar feel to it that there is regarding the specialists. Some are insanely useful and fun, while other things seem just to be plain redundant, needing a serious rethink to implement properly into the game. An idea that immediately popped into my mind is why not have a loadout like in Resident Evil games, where you can take whatever you want but have a finite space to do it. For instance, you could leave out your secondary gun, the pistol, and maybe take less ammo for the main gun in order to take health crate and a bazooka. Just a thought, because you know, fun is fun. Sound was a big deal a few battlefields back. Like the Levolution, it has since dropped in quality and iteration. With Battlefield 2042, we are reaching the absolute bottom tier. Overall, the sound lacks sharpness and detail. The direction the sounds come from can feel weird, and often you simply don't hear a tank, even if it is coming at you on full steam 1 meter away. And on contrast, while flying a chopper, you can often hear the footsteps of soldiers running under you on a field of grass. I don't have a problem with the apparently futuristic style of the crackling hisses and pops that they've applied into the soundtrack, the music, but the soundscape and the soundstage regarding the ambient sounds and sound effects specifically is, in a word, weak. A far cry from the glory days, when you were just happy to shoot the weapons in the air just to hear their delicious sounds echo delightfully into the horizon. Hiding the traditional scoreboards obviously is an attempt to tackle the toxicity issues among the players. I do honestly love how they disabled the shared chat for the fighting teams. This didn't bring anything positive into the game, and I can sort of understand not displaying the kill and death ratio. But what if I, as a player, would like to know how I'm doing and evolving as a player? Trying to get that KD ratio up has always been something I've subconsciously liked to do in the previous Battlefield games. I'd have a peak once a month or something like that. It's not something I actively followed, but now that I cannot, I absolutely miss it. Overall, the statistics screen after the match is absolute trash. You can pull heroics all you can, and the game will likely highlight something you did accidentally. My absolute favorite stats have been number of throwables thrown and something kin to awesome game, with the latter being brought up after the player joins the game in the absolute very end of the match, just to witness the outcome. This kind of speaks volumes about the design approach they've taken with the game. How about when your squad places first? Certainly you'd like to spend a moment or two looking over what people did and how you got there. Nope, the game highlights some trite crap and rushes you forward. The game desperately lacks tools and guides for people to understand how to make the most of it. Not just in-game, where it's typical that 90% of your team spends fighting at one point, while the enemy can take all its defenders from other points and keep attacking where your team is fighting at. Here's an idea. How about if you display a heat map of the battle to make people realize that they lost the fight because certain points remained uncontested and controlled by the other side from the beginning to the very end of the match. As an update, a few days ago while putting this video together, DICE announced a revamped scoreboard screen. It was a step into the right direction, I suppose, but continued to lack the KD ratio and kind of just managed to irritate me. Too little, too late. They don't seem to have any idea what the players want. Getting into the fundamentals. Enemy ghosting has been a presence ever since the betas, and I'm not talking about seeing this thing occasionally, it happens a lot. Not perhaps in every game, but still a bloody lot, and it is always equally crappy thing to experience. One of two things can happen. Players are left standing after they've died, and shooting them effectively just exposes you to their teammates. The worst kind of ghosting is when the player seems to stand still, but suddenly warp into some other location and shoot you dead. Yeah, it's that crappy. The game has a huge problem with this thing, as on occasion it feels that the players don't even see each other on the opposing sides and just clip through one another. This doesn't feel like the usual issue about some players having a huge ping or experiencing packet loss or whatever. Honestly, I haven't bumped into anything like this in an online FPS game before. Occasionally, trying to interact with these players sent you out of the game, flying into the main menu. Spawning into the fray can be a bit disappointing at times. That's understandable, because you might not understand the situation you're coming into and don't have a clue where the actual attack is coming from. That is all well and good. It happens, it's war. I don't mean it's not crap, but it happens as you click someone on the map half a second before he or she is standing in a missile barrage. The spawning system in the game needs work, as is trying to spawn into something can be a mess, as you can't make out what's what in the map since you can't zoom closer to separate the icons in any sensible way. The misery comes into full effect when you don't seem to be able to spawn anywhere, especially in the beginning of the matches. If you're not absolutely fast and practically sitting on the button, you're not getting into a vehicle and have to run a great deal to get into the action. And if you manage to get into a vehicle, it most often is a vehicle ballet when everyone tries to squeeze out from the starting zone. You just have to wonder about the choices they made designing the gameplay. Most of these points I have in this video seem to warrant a question: how much testing was being done in any given point of the game's development? Ah yes, the good old hit recognition, getting those bullets into what you're aiming at. The first thing that a first-person shooter has to absolutely get right. Combined with the enemy ghosting, the HITREG can work wonders to ruin your gaming night completely. Granted, this doesn't happen non-stop, but it is there, giving a peak with even intervals. I don't know enough about how games are run on servers and what actually could be the cause for these issues. I just know that as a player, I haven't met problems like these in such a great abundance in any game before. I mean, certainly some games have issues, but Battlefield 2042 to me seems to be plain broken. So I'm not sure if this thing can be improved or fixed with having a better internet connection on all ends. Some players, vehicles or items are just plain unreachable by any form of harm coming their way. Finally, getting to the notorious vehicles. The sheer size of the maps call for utilization of the vehicles to get into meaningful points of combat, but beyond ferrying people, the vehicles are, in a sense, a force of nature. But unlike a hurricane, these things can be stopped. There is, however, a fundamental bug in the game. Has been since its release, and it hasn't been addressed. Shooting vehicles don't give you experience points unless you're the one who delivers the last hit. It's not a wonder that people don't focus on shooting vehicles, because for starters, they can take several hits, and as you empty out your ordnance, it's highly likely that someone else makes the last hit. You're then left standing without rockets to attack the next tank with, and without any points for your efforts. It's a peculiar thing because the game already has a system for this. You can shoot an enemy soldier with someone and get a share of points. Why isn't this thing brought over to the vehicles then? So, as people don't bother dealing with vehicles, they're often left alone to run amok and make 100 kills in a contested point before someone finally decides to do something about it. The size of the maps and number of players could have supported gameplay where you travel the distances with vehicles but disembark to fight over the contested point. Instead, we have a situation where the vehicles, on ground and in the air, zoom all over the map and reap as they go by. Killing people with vehicles is easy and fast, thusly, on the receiving end, it just feels plain cheap. It's not as much about adjusting the damage the vehicles can put out. Problem is that encountering a vehicle, you are literally like a rabbit caught in the headlight. The maps have grand areas without cover, even the good maps with a degree of cover in general, and in these situations, you might as well take your hands away from the keyboard and go make some more coffee. I'm not sure that if they fix the point sharing regarding downing a chopper would actually fix this thing, but certainly it would make people focus more on spending their time with stuff that actually rewards them, like shooting a tank with a bazooka. For me, this is always something that defines an online experience. How is it to play together? In this instance, it's not as much about playing together than it is about getting to play together. Things become problematic if you have more than 4 people wanting to play together. This has been one of my biggest issues even with previous Battlefield games. Why do they insist on punishing groups of friends larger than 4 who'd like to spend time playing together? The restriction must be their idea of preventing clans of going berserk and totally dominating the games. As is, you have to go into the game with 4 people and 1 player has to leave the party, form a new party and invite the remaining players into the same match. It's a stupid exercise that you have to go through again and again with every single match you play. Also, am I the only one wishing that you could have a different highlight of color for people on your friends list? I mean, it would greatly help you coordinate stuff even if you're all already in Discord chewing the fat and in the same game but in different groups. I don't know, it just feels to me that it shouldn't be this cumbersome to play together with your friends nowadays. One of the best things that came with Battlefield 2042 was the ability to change the attachments of the gun on the flight and according to the situation. Even though I run a particular weapon mainly with some attachments, there can be situations where I need, for instance, more reach or armor penetration for the bullets. Gear not restricted to class is another feature that I felt had only positives to it. Now you can play as a medic with a sniper rifle should you so desire. Before, the restriction sort of felt forced, and now that it's not here, it feels like things are as they should be. This is a bit contradictory to highlight considering how much I dislike the vehicles in the game. But before, you basically had very little chances of getting into vehicles or aircrafts specifically. Good pilots stayed in the air through the entire match in Battlefield 5. Now stuff breaks, choppers fall down. You are practically guaranteed to get many chances to get into vehicles in the matches, if only to practice a little and get a feel to what they're about. Of course, so that you can specialize to destroying them. I was honestly surprised that they did something to the PP-29 so quickly, because in the beginning that gun was absolutely overpowered. Although rather than to attribute the change to something like how they saw that it was indeed an OP weapon, the change of the PP-29 was a part of an overhaul to all weapons, because, like most of the game, the weapons were broken and the balancing simply wasn't ready at all. Staying true to the Battlefield agenda, fixing something seems to always break something else. Currently, 7 out of 10 times you're absolutely destroyed with either the MP9 or the PKP, the current overpowered guns that spew bullets like mad with practically no recoil at all. I'm somewhat interested if they do something about these weapons, or is the situation more like what happened with Battlefield 5 and specifically a weapon called Type A2, which was absolutely overpowered and DICE did nothing, not a damn thing. I run the game with Nvidia 3090 and an i7 8700K, and interestingly there isn't a substantial difference whether I'm running the game in full or maxed details or on the lowest lows. Sure, there's of course a difference, but not something I'm accustomed to, especially given the change in the quality of details and what have you. Technically the game runs like crap, while managing to look heaps and bounds worse than the past few Battlefield games. Battlefield 2042 must have hard crashed on me more than 50 times, and I'm being generous here. Like many of you, I was interested in Portal and the Hazard Zone game modes. However, when I got around to actually trying them, the player base had already dwindled and currently it's practically non-existent. I see only a handful of games I'd consider joining due to having a bearable ping, but these games have only few people playing the matches. I mean, why would I join a game meant for 32, 64 or 128 people when there's only about 5 playing the match? We have tornadoes in every map. Always a tornado. Why can't it be a nuclear fallout, debris of a falling satellites, or a very localized earthquake? Oh, there is a sandstorm in the desert map, but to me it feels that they didn't even try with this one. The tornado is absolutely boring and doesn't really work as they obviously intended. Currently, it's just a nuisance. My examples are something that they could implement into the game somewhat easily because they don't break the terrain and thusly require effort that they're not ready to take. Having proper earthquakes and changing terrain would take things dangerously close to revolution, and we can't have that. Personally, I haven't had this much trouble with any game ever. I must have reloaded and reinstalled the game at least 6 times, done display card driver shuffles, and tried generally to figure out if there's something I can do Windows-wise to make the game work better. I've had to try tons of things. Simply put, I cannot recommend this game to anyone, even in its current state. It has lots and lots of bugs, glaring design flaws, and stuff that shouldn't exist in a modern AAA game. Then again, I wouldn't have played this game for 300 hours if it was a total stinker. There is, amongst all the crap, a hint of a proper Battlefield experience. The most, however, that is not enough, and that is why the game is dying. I bought the gold edition of the game, and that was like twice the price of a new game, and I got half a game. Going forward, it is difficult for me to see EA and DICE justify the price in the future, especially since I read something about changing this into free-to-play being an option. I mean, I certainly do hope that Battlefield 2042 will rise from the ashes, but their general radio silence doesn't bode well. Yeah, there was some news about new studio heads and all, but those things don't mean anything until proven otherwise. Don't get me wrong, I do hope that they can right these wrongs we were sold, and I'm more than ready to be happily surprised. Commercially, the launch of Battlefield 2042 was a success. I mean, it must have been. Unofficial numbers I've seen thrown about in the news have been around 5 million units sold. A disappointment in some aspects for a AAA game, but a good solid number. The stockholders remain content, I suppose. However, the launch of the next Battlefield title will be a difficult one, and one sure to get the attention of the said investors and stakeholders. Because even the fans of the series won't buy it blindly this time, at least most of us won't. We have learned the lesson. Probably. The launch of the Battlefield 2042 was the absolute worst a Battlefield launch has ever been, and the game itself is still in a sorry state. I myself will probably give this game a rest. 300 hours is plenty gaming for that 90 euros, I suppose. I'll check back after the March updates, but unfortunately for Battlefield 2042, I am ready for new and better things.